I'm Jeff Hogarth, and I used to own the Iron Door, and this show is about the original Iron Door revisited. And all these bands you see here were the original Iron Door bands. From the very start we used to put this rock and roll on. The other clubs were playing jazz, traditional jazz, and modern jazz. But from the very start we started with this rock and roll. We used to go to the Mardi Gras, and we wanted to open something a bit different.
So I'm walking down Matthew Street and I bump into Jeff, and he said, I've just bought a club. And he said, I'm going to call it the Iron Door. He said, would you like to see it? So I said, yeah, great, where is it? So we carries on down Matthew Street, turns left, and we're into Temple Street. And there's this building, big tall building with this big iron door. We opened the iron door and there was all lifts and machinery and all kinds. He said, I'm going to rip all this out. I said, great. He said, how long are you on for? I said, 2 weeks. So he said, well, we're starting work tomorrow. He said, do you want to come down and help us? So I said, great. I said, how much are you paying? He said, well, we've got plenty of tea.
So we decided to open a club with a basement, but the top part being with a carpet and looking pretty luxurious. Initially we were going to make the top part, which we did by the way. It was going to be on the Parisian nightclub style and the Cotton Club. We had trellises and flowers in the ceiling which added all the atmosphere. So that's how the Iron Door came about. So that's what it was, the basement like the Cavern and the top part like the Mardi Gras. So we had the best of both worlds there. The Mardi Gras and the Cavern all in one.
It had the sort of air of mystery about it because that big iron door on the front end gave a bit of sort of cachet to the place you went in there, you know. And when you went in, there was all the colours all over the place, the walls and everything. It was really great.
I'm Sam Leach. As you probably know, the man who probably brought the Cavern kicking and screaming into the rock and roll era on March the 11th, 61. I've been doing shows at the Iron Door and I put an all-nighter on and we got 1,800 people. The Cavern that night had 50 people. So 10 days later it turned over to rock and roll at night. It just makes me smile when he's at the Cavern where it all began. The Cavern was the last club to put rock and roll on. It just makes me smile. First night was incredible, the first all-night session. There was 12 bands on, 12 hours. Starting 8 o'clock at night, going right through to 8 o'clock next day. And we used to put Teddy Taylor on 7 in the morning so that the people would stay. We never had less than 700 people stay all night, you know, marvellous. We closed up with 1,000 people in by about 8:15. And then the young kids in those days didn't have cars, so they get the early bus home, the last bus. So I'd been selling tickets for the second house. It was like a cinema, 2 houses, and altogether we got 1,800 people in. And I think that's still a record, the Iron Door, you know. And the atmosphere was just unbelievable. It really was great, you know. Then we did it, that's when Cilla Black started. Remember Cilla? She got up one night there and she had a fantastic voice. And I said to her, you've got a great voice. She said, oh, she was too shy, too embarrassed to sing. So I went and put an advert in the Echo for the following Saturday at the Casanova Club in London Road. Swinging Cilla. And that was it. You've got no choice now, you've got to sing. And she did, and that was the start.
Jeff gave us, he helped give us our start. If you think about it logically. Him and Ralph Webster, who was our former manager, God love him, he's passed on now, but he was our former manager. But I mean, people like Jeff, Brian Kelly, Ralph Webster, and even Brian Epstein in his own little way, they gave us our start. They allowed us to do what we were doing. They said, go for it, you do what you do. And you can't thank people like Jeff enough.
Yeah, the thing that people forget about them is that they're like the unsung heroes, Sammy Leach, Jeff Hogarth. They are really unsung heroes of the Merseybeat era. Without them, the Merseybeat era literally would not be here. Brian Kelly, as I say, I was talking about Brian Kelly. Who talks about Brian Kelly? Nobody. Because he's an unsung hero. Ibermar, which was, BK Promotions, Brian Kelly. You had Doug Martin and Doug McIver, who used to do the Jive Hive. Now, without those people to give the bands a chance and putting their neck on the line, which they did, because the whole night was totally rock and roll, as opposed to the likes of Little Town Hall, which was Dave Anthony with his orchestra or his band, and you did a spot in the middle just to, while people had their cups of tea or whatever, because there was no alcohol then in places. And it's great that people acknowledge them. Sammy Leach, I plug Sammy Leach as much as I can. And to be quite honest, even myself, the Iron Door was always my favourite venue, and that is absolutely on it. It was 10 times better than it. I didn't really like the Cavern in those days. Iron Door couldn't get enough of it. And of course Jeff, easygoing, Sammy, easygoing, and he made it great, and they stuck their necks out for the lads. And as I say, without them, it wouldn't even be here. You wouldn't even be talking about it.
If you're talking about the Iron Door when it first opened, obviously my memories are sweet, brilliant memories of that place. Everything was just sort of. There were no responsibilities then. It was just so easy to do.
The atmosphere was there in the 60s. It was a good time to live, in my opinion.
We met Jeff about 1960, 61, and then I think the club was still the Storyville at that time, the Iron Door. We went down and did it again, and virtually it was like a residency for us. We were there every other week, as good as.
I remember going down to the Iron Door, and our first gig down there, the amplifiers were all wrong, and there was all kinds of backlash of sound, but it was a marvellous club, and it never gets ever mentioned now because it's been knocked down, but it was the place where all these superstars, a lot of the superstars have started, like the Searchers were always playing on the Iron Door, and Beryl Marsden, who's on here tonight, and Freddie Starr, and there's loads. Kenny Ball wrote a hit record in there that was top of the hit parade.
If you go back 40 years to when the Iron Door was opened, it was Tony Jackson, Chris Curtis, John McNally, and myself, Mike Pender. We made up one of the famous groups from Liverpool, amongst others. First of all, I remember a headline in the Merseybeat. That was the local paper they had at that time. I think Bill Harry used to write it. But I remember the headlines on the front of the Merseybeat when we got back from Hamburg. Welcome home, the Searchers. Welcome to your home. The Iron Door is the home of the Searchers. And I remember somebody wrote it down, so it stayed in my memory. But not only that, of course, but we played there so many times. And it was good to have that sort of connection with such a place as the Iron Door, which has gone down in history with many 60s pop fans.
My name's Joe Flannery. I remember quite a lot about the 60s. In particular, well before the 60s, when Brian Epstein and I were growing up. In our family businesses, my father was a furniture manufacturer and his father was a furniture retailer. So the furniture that my father was making was going off to the Epstein shop in Walton Road. And of course we met as children. I was quite lucky meeting Jeff, who gave us quite a lot of bookings in the Iron Door.
But I think the abiding memory of the Iron Door is having to carry all the equipment up and downstairs.
One particular night, to get out of the heat down below, they'd gone, not particularly the Beatles, but any of the bands had gone to go into the cloakroom just to have a bit of a kip or a sleep or whatever. And one particular morning, Sunday morning, I stepped over this body and somebody looked up at me and said, "It's cold in here, isn't it?" It was John Lennon, fast asleep with somebody's coat over him.
The first Sunday booking that we had in the Iron Door, we were setting up, got down there very handy to get set up and have a sound check. And I was standing on one wall watching the band setting up and doing their thing. And then I'm looking around and I spotted somebody leaning on the wall in the corner. I got a bit nosy, I wanted to know who that person was. And then as I got closer I recognised it was Brian Epstein. I thought he'd just come down to see us, you know. So he said, "No," he said, "I'm with my band." He said, "They're supporting Lee Curtis tonight." So I said, "Oh, I've heard about you taking a band up." And it was, you know, it was very early, and it was the Beatles. So my brother came over to me then while I was talking to Brian, and he said, "Joe," he said, "our bass equipment's gone down." He said, I said, "Bloody hell, it's Sunday. You know, what can we do?" So I looked at Brian and I said, "Do you think your band would chip in and let us use the bass equipment?" So I said, "Who's the bass player?" So Paul McCartney said, "I am." So I said, "I've spoke to your manager, Brian." I said, "We're good friends." I said, and he said, "It's okay if it's okay with you to lend us your bass amplifier." Paul McCartney shouted over to John, "This man here wants to borrow our bass equipment." And John immediately, like as though it was following out of Paul's mouth, he said, "The show must go on, man." He said, "Of course he can borrow the equipment." Okay, and that was fine. And we became really good friends, all of us, from that night on. Even Brian said to me, he said, "Come over to the Beehive." That was his favourite pub. And he used to always have his lunch there as well. Just walked from Mims into the Beehive. And we went over there and had a chat, and we decided to become partners in tandem. That means you can have your own company and he can have his own company, and we can work together. So we decided to do that, and I became the Beatles booking manager, and Brian became the office contracts going out, even for Lee Curtis and Beryl Marsden, my artists. And as time went by, he was signing, the likes of Zeller and all those people. I did a lot of business with the Iron Door. I think I did more business with the Iron Door than I did with the Cavern, because we were never out the Iron Door.
And it's not the Cavern, it's this place, the Iron Door, where they all came from. They all went in there and they started. In fact, they wouldn't have to be any other places.
It was a great gig. I'd say, basically, to play, it was a better situation than the Cavern. It didn't stink for the kick-off, and it wasn't damp.
Remember one afternoon, we were doing an afternoon session, and Raymond Forrest said to the Beatles, "If you play for Sam Leach, you're not playing for me. This is all at time, because this is in the daytime." So I made him on Terry McCann, went to Wizard's Den. They bought some stink bombs, and as the Cavern opened that afternoon, he lobbed the stink bombs all over the place. I was surprised he noticed the difference, quite honestly. I remember Lemon coming down the corner laughing his head off. I said, "What have you done, Leachy?" He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You closed the Cavern down so they came and played for me instead." But on my honour, I didn't know anything about it till about 3 months later. But nobody believes that, but I don't care. I wish I had thought of it.
Brian Kelly, who ran the Ludlam Town Hall and the Latham Hall, was an avid viewer of Huckleberry Hound Show, as I was. I went to train as a cartoonist at the College of Art originally, when I was 15. So I used to love cartoons in all their shapes and forms. In 1958 there was a particular Huckleberry Hound show where Huckleberry Hound received a crate from his Australian uncle, and when he opened it up, its kangaroo jumped out going boing, boing, boing all over the place. He says, "Oh, a king-size meese." And he thought it was a huge mouse, so it just creased me. I really thought it was great. Never heard the word king-size before that, actually. So I went down we were playing at the Latham Hall, and I shouted to Brian Kelly at the door, I said, "Did you see Huckleberry Hound tonight?" He says, "Yeah, here comes king-size Taylor." And he thought that was exactly the same as me. Hilarious thing to come out with. And he actually went on stage that night and he announced them. Here we have new name for, it used to be just the Dominoes then, he said, new name for the Dominoes, king-size Taylor and the Dominoes. And that's literally how it started.
I mean, king-size Taylor's harmonising was copied by the Beatles, you know. In fact, every band in Liverpool would copy Teddy Taylor. He was on the mailing list of Chess Records, and he always got the early records before anyone else. And every band in Liverpool would go to his concert with a notebook and pencil, taking down the chords and the words, including Paul McCartney. He doesn't like admitting that, but it's true, you know.
There were no sort of restrictions with the bands. You were told to turn up, you did your spot and it was great, and you got your couple of bob. I mean, nobody paid a lot of money in those days. Nobody really bothered when you got paid. But the thing I liked about the Iron Door is, I think I'm not sure whether they started at 8 in the evening and went through till 8 on the Sunday morning. And I can always remember, I'm not sure whether it was Sammy that actually said to me, or I think it was Sammy that said, "I know it's unfair, but we always put you on 7 till 8. And we always will, because you are the only band that can keep the crowd here after 7 o'clock in the morning." And so we used to literally go home. We'd perhaps do 3 or 4 gigs. No, 3 on the night before, and then whiz off about 10 to 7. Straight down the Dock Road, straight into town, straight on stage, play till 8 o'clock and go home to bed again, you know. And it was a fabulous atmosphere. And even after these people had been in a club for 12 hours, they were still loving it, you know.
The lasting memory was when we were all absolutely knackered in the morning, that King-Size Taylor and the Dominoes were always last on, and they had had a good night's sleep, and they all came in looking bright and pleased after a good breakfast. And it all started again.
People stayed there all night. It was a fantastic feeling. But of course, we didn't know anything else in them days. It was like sort of, I mean, I must have been somewhere around about 18, 19, somewhere around that age. And of course, when you're that young, it's such an adventure to have a place like that to go to, full of your fans all the time. We built a great relationship with the fans in the Iron Door. Most of our fans went there. I remember sort of, you know, before we went on stage, yeah, you know, they were there. I suppose even before we made the big time, made our first record, we thought we were stars because we were playing the Iron Door.
They used to do all-night sessions there, and the atmosphere was great because bands would be arriving all the time who were going to play into the early hours, you know. So there were band members and equipment everywhere, and all the people who went just for the dancing, you know. And it was a great club, a great atmosphere.
Yeah, I remember playing a 36-hour stint one time. We ended up at the Iron Door. I hadn't gone to bed for about 36 hours, you know. I think we played about 4